it interesting that just a couple of weeks ago, maybe a week ago, we were at a point where people were fawning over the Miami Heat. They're back. You can't count them out. This is the Eastern Conference team. Every team, if you're going to fear any team, you should fear this team. Hell, you even had that carnival barker, Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett, that were trying to bark up that tree. I almost feel like they're trying to reverse jinx. But then it's interesting today. You have this game against the Denver Nuggets. And I told you yesterday, I was not pleased with Jimmy Butler's performance. And really, I'm tired of losing to that team. It's a very unfamiliar feeling to the Heat fan because, you usually have bragging rights or competitive series over Boston, over Milwaukee, over Philadelphia, over the New York Knicks. You've handed them an L all very recently in playoff history. But regular season history, postseason history, the Denver Nuggets, they haven't been there. And Zach Lowe, Tim Legler, two guys who are kissing the Heat's ass, now all of a sudden are starting to get skittish. And Tim Legler had a pretty hard call out of Jimmy Butler, where he's like, oh, well, what about regular season Jimmy Butler? We all talk about this playoff Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler, who declared that it's that time, and I believe they've been under 500 since he declared it being that time. I am curious to see with Jimmy what the adjustments are going to be, what he's going through right now. I got to tell you, one thing that is interesting to me, there was a point that was made yesterday. Brady Hawk had asked Spo about Jimmy Butler's free throws. It was an interesting answer from Erik Spoelstra. You guys could check this out. But Spo was very, very perturbed with where things are with the league right now because there has been this big adjustment, it seems, to stifle the offense. And one of the ways that the league has been trying to do that, because what are you going to do, stifle shooting, is they're not calling as many fouls. They're not going to give you those easy ones to the free throw line. And Spo was like, yeah, we didn't get the memo.
I think that's an adjustment from the league. Staff has been talking about that I didn't receive a memo about it, but it's clear that they're calling it a little bit more like that. So, hey, we have to make the adjustment, and I think that's a good adjustment. Go to score, not necessarily to draw fouls. Now, Jimmy's got a rugged game, so he's not going to draw fouls. He's going to wherever the contact may be. And, yeah, from my vantage point, it looks like some of those, are fouls. Certainly in the last 3 or 4 games, that those were typically, fouls. But that's not why we're losing games. He'll make the adjustment, whether he has to just go into shot-making mode. That might have to be the adjustment. I have to do a better job, getting our guys into their strength zones where we can still be aggressive and attack, but hit different parts of our menu. And we'll get to work on that. Yes, it's frustrating, but all we're going to focus on is what we can do to get better and have a great road trip.
Well, they have a very key road trip. They're heading to Detroit. They've headed over to Detroit, which they do not have for this trip, Tyler Hero and Kevin Love. And I will say I'll get to the free throw thing in a second, but I do think one thing I noticed with yesterday's game, it doesn't alleviate everything from Jimmy because he was kind of a ghost in the fourth quarter, but there were pockets, if you've noticed the way that the Heat adjusted their substitutions when they were going good, Jimmy was playing a lot with Jaime and he was playing with Kevin Love. And a lot of the times, Jimmy likes to leak back on defense sometimes when the guy gets a rebound to get going, and you get those chances where they'll throw those outlet passes. Kyle was known for this, the Kyle cast, but Kevin Love is obviously great with the outlet pass, and Jimmy will get his hands, get a good position, wait on hesitation, and get those easy buckets. Man, there must have been probably 4 or 5 plays yesterday where you could just tell guys did not know where to find Jimmy Butler, whether it was Terry, whether it was Patty, whether it was Jovic, whether it was Dunks. Like, there was just, I could see a frustration on Jimmy Butler's face at times yesterday on the floor that he was just not in sync. And I think one of the things that we had seen is this team did get to a spot where, Jimmy was getting into his comfort zones, was having the ball in his hands a lot, and I think we just saw the Jimmy Butler that we're all familiar with. And I do think that something has happened here, not just with the free throws, although we'll get to that in a second, but they need to they need to fix and find something, because if he doesn't have Kevin Love, and we don't know when Kevin's going to be back because he's not on this road trip, so it looks like another 4 games. And if you're going to say, like, look, I don't believe the Heat are trying to save Tyler Hero over the playoffs. I could see it with Kevin Love. They're going to be very cautious with him because they don't really have. Although Thomas Bryant played had a very valiant effort yesterday and played a really good game, they don't really have anybody better than Kevin to be in that backup 5 spot, and also one who has the chemistry with Jimmy. And I think, like, if you're going to look at the 2 tandems on this team that really work well together, you have Duncan and Bam, and you have Jimmy and Kevin. And I do think not having Kevin Love has affected Jimmy Butler a little bit. Now, as far as the free throw thing is concerned, that is an interesting one, because I would think adjustments like this, like Jimmy does play very physical, and you have noticed a lot of eyeball and a lot of side-eye, and he's not a complainer to the officials. He's not a guy who gets a lot of technicals. He does put his head down, and I don't know if that's something that's going to change with him, because you might have to be more demonstrative to get these kind of calls. But it's certainly been noticeable. You're averaging 4 free throws a game when that's typically half of what he normally gets. It's a big part of his superpower. I've always said, like, Jimmy Butler could grab a game by the neck and he could have whatever free, but he'll force and grit his way to 18, 19 points just by that, whether it be by free throws, whether it be by getting to his spots in the paint. And I think the thing that's been interesting with these, especially the Denver matchup, is how much they have kept him on the outside and have gotten him to settle and have gotten him to avoid going in there. But this has not been a topic. I remember asking Erik Spoelstra about this when they changed the foul rules. This was a couple seasons ago. This was, I think this was before the year that, this was the year they were the 1 seed, but it was early on in the season. And he had said that nobody in the league wants to reward what he dubs trickery.
Sure. It'll be different, but I think we all want it. I think there'll probably be some growing pains and maybe some early frustration, but that usually happens when they make some changes. But nobody wants to see non-basketball plays or trickery being rewarded. These guys are so smart that all the skilled players have learned how to manipulate the game. They'll still be able to control games and manipulate competition, but it doesn't have to be a form of trickery with the officials.
NBA.com.
And when he says trickery, like the guys who are the big culprits of that, the poster child for it is James Harden. I would say number 1 protege, that's probably Trae Young. And that's a big part of that. You remember that was the year coming off of Trae Young and the Hawks going to the Eastern Conference Finals. So this is a little bit different because it's not necessarily adjustment of a rule or not giving not getting deceived by anything. This just may just be a straight up case of the league trying to let games be more physical, which honestly I think a lot of people would like. But Jimmy already played a very physical style, and what happens when that is not rewarded the same way that it was? Does that really take a chunk out of him? And how does the Heat adjust to that? Well, you need Jimmy Butler, as Spo said, to go in shot-making mode. You need him to go on a heater like playoff Jimmy did in the Bucks series, where he was just nailing everything and going crazy. But can that sustain over a playoff run? Because one of the things that's great about Jimmy is free throws, and willing that because the game's slow down, that usually translates. One of the things that is brilliant about Jimmy and what makes him such a great playoff player, he's always going to have that bread and butter to go to. But if he doesn't have that sustainability the same way, then you have to wonder about what adjustment has to make. Because he's said, we've heard from him recently where he said,
if I wanted to shoot all threes, I actually could, and I think that I would shoot a really good percentage. I just like running into the paint and running into people and seeing who's going to fall down first. When I attack, I think that we are at our best. I get to get my shooters involved. I get to get my teammates involved. And I get to pass first. I get to be a playmaker. And that's how I want to play the game of basketball.
I could be a shooter, but I like to run into people. I like to break people's will. I like to go in there and I like to make things a car crash, essentially. And that's going to be an interesting thing for him because, if this is something that's not the norm, or not, they're not calling the same way. What is it? Now, one of the things with Jimmy's an elite player. He's great. And usually great elite players can make those adjustments. So you still have to have faith that's there. But those, when you're looking into his slump or little dip from the time that we all thought the Jim VP train was starting to heat back up again, I do think that this is one of those where he will be able to find an adjustment that is necessary. He's too good. He is too savvy. And also there could be a balance of this in the league. Usually if there's a huge correction, they may correct it the other way. You never know, or they may relief on it a little bit because of certain other players that want it. But it definitely is something that is interesting to keep an eye on, and definitely had Spo a little perturbed after a Denver loss where he was not in a great mood to begin with. So something to keep an eye on.